believe that I come from an ancient family of witches and warlocks, a gift whose origins trace back to the dark days of the Salem witch trials. Whispers tell that our ancestors, who once lived in secluded hamlets on the outskirts of old Salem's notorious meeting spots, were blessed and cursed with an age-old wisdom and secret rituals. Witch, or sorcerer, as we were once called, but what we truly are defies any simple definition. Perhaps it is the pact with the forces of nature, or even the devil, that courses through our veins, bestowing us with mysterious healing powers. If anyone should have the final answer, I implore you to tell me. The proof of this uncanny gift is as enigmatic as our origins. My mother, once a respected herbalist in a small, venerable New England town near Salem, had always healed using ancient herbs and recipes passed down through generations. Even as a child, I witnessed how she could make injuries, ones that would normally take weeks to heal, vanish within mere hours. Burns that in our neighborhood would fester for weeks disappeared almost instantly, once treated with a secret blend of locally grown herbs, pure honey from her own beehives, and a hint of nearly forgotten rituals. "Our old gifts work only within this family," she would whisper to me. "No modern medicine can ever replicate it." And so we simply credited it to good genes, as if nothing else could explain it. Our family had long called a quiet Massachusetts village home, a place steeped in tradition and a deep-rooted belief in the unseen. But when I was 5 and my sister 10, fate forced us to leave that comfortable refuge and relocate to a renovated historic building in the heart of Salem. There, in a restored colonial structure with creaking wooden beams and narrow cobblestone alleys, Mom opened her practice. In a building that also housed a small theater for local legends, a tea room, and even a quiet chapel used by a nearby congregation, her practice drew all eyes. Appointments were rare and precious, and patients flocked to her as if drawn by an instinctive awareness of the extraordinary power in our blood. On one of those early days when Mom brought us along to her practice, without revealing the true purpose, we wandered through the surrounding rooms with innocent curiosity. Alongside a physical therapy clinic, a quaint tea parlor, and a small chapel, we discovered on the 3rd floor, at the end of a long, dim corridor, an unassuming door that creaked ominously. As we approached, I felt a chill that clung to me like a mist despite the sweltering summer heat outside. "Maybe it's just the ancient stone walls," my sister whispered, more intrigued than afraid. "I'm not sure," I murmured, an inexplicable warning urging me to turn back and find Mom. Before I could protest, my sister, almost as if in a trance, knocked on the door. Receiving no answer, she grasped the rusted knob and slowly turned it. The door swung open to reveal a dusty storage room filled with old crates, decaying furniture, and a jumble of forgotten trinkets. Scattered about were bird feathers, seemingly strewn about in a fit of rage by a flock of crows or pigeons, and some even floated weightlessly in the stale air. We stepped in, each footfall accompanied by a foreboding crackle in the silence. Mere steps into the room, I felt the cold touch of something hard against the tip of my boot. Looking down, I saw a lifeless pigeon. "Look," I cried, as my sister, approaching a toppled chair, discovered yet another dead bird. On tables, shelves, and even in a dusty corner lay the motionless bodies of pigeons, sparrows, and even a solitary crow. The sight sent shivers through us, as if we had inadvertently trespassed into the aftermath of an age-old ritual. With hearts pounding, we ran back to the practice, utterly speechless. When we finally told Mom everything, she looked at us with a mixture of stern seriousness and ancient wisdom. "Did you lock that door?" she asked coolly. She warned us to stay away from the forbidden rooms, spaces that had not been trodden by ordinary people for centuries. That very evening, she closed the practice early and tucked us into bed while waiting for Dad to pick us up. I, a light sleeper, awoke in the night when Mom briefly left the room. In my restless sleep, I dreamed that she returned to that very forbidden room, picked up the dead pigeon, whispered soft words to it, and, as if obeying an old spell, watched it suddenly come to life and flutter away. Since childhood, I had sometimes dreamt events that later unfolded in reality. When I was 11, a masked man, dressed in a worn leather jacket and faded jeans, appeared in my dreams, trying to break in through the back door of our old house. I stood, transfixed, as if watching from outside. Soon after, I woke and recounted the dream to my parents. Dad, who never shied away from danger, immediately grabbed an old heavy wooden mallet, which he jokingly called his devil's hammer, and raced down the stairs while Mom called the police. Dad caught the intruder in our kitchen, his face still obscured by the mask. A stark reminder that in our family nothing was left to chance. My father, a free spirit with deep colonial roots, a lineage that stretched back to the noble families of early Massachusetts, where native legends mingled with Puritan beliefs, had always been a man of many talents. At one time, he researched tropical diseases. Later, he turned to woodworking and crafted exquisite furniture, dabbled in painting and photography, and eventually returned to research after several upheavals. Today, he works as an undertaker, a calling that suits his unconventional nature more than any other. Mom often joked that he never found a profession that fit him because he was a restless soul, always in motion. Even Dad seemed to harbor the gift of rapid healing, a talent that manifested in the old herbal recipes passed down through our family for centuries. He would fast regularly on Fridays and, under every full moon, absorb the last ray of sunlight as if to capture nature's own magic. I dismissed it as his romantic, nature-loving streak, and perhaps as a nod to the secret powers that flowed in our veins. They said our family never truly aged. You could see it in Dad's flawless appearance, who, though in his 60s, looked like a man in his 40s. Was it simply our genes, or was it the ancient knowledge hidden within us? The years passed, and just as our family had always thrived, wealth, success, and the uncanny ability to achieve the impossible, my childhood was largely carefree. My sister and I excelled in school and soon went on to prestigious colleges. Yet in my final year, I was hit by one of the darkest phases of my life. The separation from my family, the pressure to excel academically, and the struggle with my own identity weighed on me. I began to recognize that I was gay, a truth I felt compelled to hide from our staunchly traditional family. My then-boyfriend, Lucas, did his best to support me, yet I often pushed him away, terrified of exposing my inner turmoil. In hindsight, it all seems foolish, but on that evening I vowed to sacrifice everything to reclaim peace, and fate seemed to smile upon us. Lucas and I found our way back to each other. I mustered the courage to come out to my family, and to my surprise, they embraced me with unwavering love. We graduated with honors, but on the very night after our graduation celebration, a tragic twist struck. A drunk driver rammed into me on a busy Salem street. My left leg was severely injured, and doctors said it would be weeks before I could walk normally again. Mom, however, insisted that her ancient herbs and rituals could accelerate my recovery. Later, my sister, now a law student working at a small government office, recounted one evening at a local, time-worn tavern an odd incident from one of her classes. A professor, infamous for his harsh humiliations, had relentlessly bombarded her with piercing questions for nearly an hour during a remedial session. Standing there with a fixed expression, she replied coolly, even as she silently vowed a poetic retribution. No sooner had she finished her sentence than the professor slumped over, as if his life force had been drained in that moment. "I knew it immediately," she later whispered while sipping a glass of American whiskey. "I just hoped that this small victory might earn me a good grade." And indeed, she received the highest mark in that class, only to suffer a mild stroke later that same day, from which she fortunately recovered quickly. The more I reflected on these events, the more I recognized a disturbing pattern. Every time our deepest wishes were granted, even the most unlikely, they were immediately followed by calamity. A petty slight inflicted a painful burn on my hand. An unexpected win in a contest I barely prepared for resulted in a nasty bruise. Even when my sister, at 18, won a sparkling new car and a prize of $10,000 in a sweepstake, she later tumbled down a staircase. An accident that, thanks to Dad's swift intervention, ended only in a minor injury. I, by some grace, was spared such trials, until Lucas confided a dark secret in the first months of our marriage. At a college party, 3 of our supposed friends had so thoroughly inebriated him that he lost consciousness. In the few moments before he woke, he realized with dawning horror that he had been sexually violated. This humiliation, which he buried deep after our first separation, was only revealed later when we reconciled. I needed no further proof to grasp the terrible truth. Knowing that those we called friends had betrayed Lucas was a daily nightmare, a pain I carried, unable to protect him from the hurt. In my despair and anger, both at those who wronged him and at myself for failing to shield him, the darkness within me grew. That night, I went to bed cursing those who had inflicted such deep wounds, silently wishing that fate would someday exact its revenge. But the true turning point came the next morning. As I reached for my coffee mug, an old glass shattered in my hand. A sharp shard sliced through my palm, a cut that not only severed flesh but struck a vital artery. I had never lost so much blood in my life. In a state of panicked urgency, Lucas rushed me to the emergency room at a busy Salem hospital. During the ride, I slipped into unconsciousness and experienced 3 surreal visions. First, I saw pale, gloved hands twitching uncontrollably. Then, the image of a pregnant woman from whom crimson blood streamed down her legs. And finally, I found myself on a chaotic construction site, where a dazzling light and the sound of falling steel beams overwhelmed my senses. At the hospital, expert doctors treated and bandaged my injured hand. As they meticulously explained how I must care for it, all I could think of were my parents. Mom, still tending to her New England herbal traditions in our old family town near Salem, and Dad, now residing in a modest village on the outskirts of Massachusetts. They needed to be informed immediately. Mom promised to come at once. That very evening, she arrived at the hospital armed with bundles of homegrown herbs and ancient recipes passed down from her grandfather, who had lived during the days of the witch trials. She spent the entire night by my bedside, and barely 2 hours after Dad confirmed her safe arrival at home, my hand had healed as if by miracle. A few months later, news reached us that those who had inflicted such unspeakable torment on Lucas had begun to suffer mysterious retributions. The surgeon involved was forced to quit his job, plagued by early-onset Parkinson's and further accusations of misconduct. The friend who had once aimed to shine in the legal field faltered disastrously and spiraled into alcoholism. And the medical student who had witnessed those heinous acts was involved in a severe accident. A falling steel beam sent him into a coma. Yet fate was not done testing us. It would do so again in modern times during the tumult of the COVID-19 pandemic. While the virus gripped all of America, our closely knit family was pushed to its limits. My maternal grandmother still lived in our old Salem village, while my paternal grandparents resided in a quaint town in rural Massachusetts. Within days, news broke that all of them, young and old alike, had tested positive. Though miles apart, we remained bound by the invisible thread of family. Lucas and I were expecting our first child through surrogacy, and I longed for our grandparents to meet their great-grandchild. I prayed and hoped, despite the dire circumstances, that my grandparents would overcome the pandemic. They were all in their 80s and burdened by chronic illnesses. Miraculously, by the end of April, fate seemed to smile upon us. All of my grandparents recovered, to the astonishment of the entire family. Yet the very next day, Lucas began showing symptoms that rapidly worsened. Was it divine retribution, or merely another sign that nature governed its own inscrutable laws? Amidst all these events, one afternoon, I received a call from my cousin back in our old Salem town. He told me that Grandma, as we affectionately called our matriarch, urgently wished to speak with me. Her voice, weak yet imbued with an ancient wisdom, began by thanking me. Then she said that I should have let her, along with Granny and Pop, go on peacefully. They were ready to cross over, and that they were expecting baby heaven from the other side. Lucas and I had never told anyone that if our child were a girl, we would name her Heaven, or Loeb if a boy. That call left me dumbfounded and burdened with a deep sense of guilt. Not long after, my paternal grandparents received a similar call, urging me to wish wisely, for every wish comes with a price. They lamented that my parents should have told me the whole truth long ago, a rebuke that stirred long-buried questions in my mind. Only 2 days ago, when Lucas's symptoms became so unbearable that I decided to take him to the hospital, my parents suddenly appeared at our door. They immediately asked after Lucas, and as I explained that he lay in our bedroom and we were about to leave, Dad briskly pushed past me and raced up the stairs. Mom joined me, her voice gentle yet resolute. "We will take care of Lucas now. He must recover soon. We know exactly what to do. But you always say our herbs don't work on outsiders," I protested desperately, fearing that even they might be imperiled by this strange power. "It will work," she murmured almost ominously, as we heard the soft footsteps of Lucas and Dad descending the stairs. "Trust us. Lucas is family, and in our family we carry the legacy of these ancient gifts. We must care for one another." With one arm protecting Lucas, Dad vanished with him while I was left alone in the silence, overwhelmed by worry and the unyielding curiosity to uncover the secrets of our ancestors. For 2 days now, I have heard nothing from them or from Lucas. The uncertainty, the secrets hidden deep in our family blood, are eating away at me. All those questions I had swept under the rug as a child now clamored to be heard. So far, only one thing seems clear. We are a family whose magical powers, whether in healing, in fulfilling our deepest wishes, or in daring to defy fate, stem from the old haunted days of the Salem witch trials. Some of us perform miracles, others slow the passage of time, and some pay a heavy price for every wish that comes true. Whether this is the truth or merely the distorted perception of a soul caught between fear and hope remains uncertain. I worry endlessly for Lucas, as the call of the past and the secrets of our family grow ever louder. Perhaps, in my confused state, I am merely spinning wild theories, but one thing I know for certain. I pray with all my heart that my beloved Lucas will soon return to us, alive and well. This tale may sound like a legend, a blend of ancient superstition and modern misfortune, but every word is steeped in a reality we can feel along the shadowed alleys of Salem and in the mysterious forests of New England. Perhaps, when we finally unlock the secrets of our ancestors, fate itself will reveal the truth. Until then, we can only hope that these old gifts, be they curse or blessing, will guide and protect us. I live in Salem, Massachusetts, a town where the heavy weight of haunted history collides with the grim realities of daily life under an ever-watchful, pious gaze. In this bitter autumn of 1692, when suspicion and superstition rule our streets, I serve as a humble clerk in the magistrate's office, tasked with recording testimonies and preserving evidence in these troubled times. Though my work is steeped in the terror of witchcraft accusations, I had grown accustomed to the rhythm of our days, until one fateful autumn day changed everything. The morning was unusually cool, the fog clinging to the cobblestone lanes as neighbors made their way to the meeting house. I had risen early, hoping that the crisp air might ease the burdens of my heart. After attending to my morning duties in the dim light of oil lamps, I took a brief respite at a modest tavern near the town square. There, I shared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and stew with a few acquaintances, listening to whispered rumors of strange happenings at the edge of the town. The promise of a quiet day, however, was soon shattered. Returning to the magistrate's office, I was startled by the sudden arrival of my dear colleague, Mary. Her eyes were wide with terror as she nearly gasped, "My sister is in labor." Her voice trembled with urgency, a desperate plea that cut through the somber hush of our office. "God be with her," I managed to say, my tone subdued but concerned. "No, you don't understand," Mary insisted in a frantic whisper. "She is due in 2 weeks, yet this untimely travail strikes now. My husband, Elias, is away on urgent business in Boston, and my kin are scattered. I must hasten to the midwife's dwelling at once." With a trembling hand, she clutched her prayer book as if it were a talisman, and without a backward glance, she departed into the murk of the street. Left alone with my parchments and quills, I resumed my work with a distracted mind. The day passed in a haze of routine inquiries and solemn declarations from the accused, intermingled with murmurs of divine wrath and diabolical misfortune. Yet, as dusk began to fall and the meeting house's heavy wooden doors were bolted for the night, a disquieting series of events unfurled, events that defied all rational explanation. I had taken it upon myself to secure the chamber where the evidence against the accused was laid out, a humble room adorned with crude portraits and wax figures meant to illustrate the fabled rites of witchcraft. By candlelight, I inspected every corner, ensuring that no soul lingered within these hallowed yet haunted walls. It was in this quiet vigil that I first noticed something amiss. Along one wall hung a series of portraits depicting the accused witches and their accusers. One such portrait, of a stern woman known to the townsfolk as Eve, had always seemed almost lifelike, the painted eyes brimming with quiet intensity. That evening, as I passed by, I swear her gaze shifted ever so subtly, following my every movement. I shook my head, attributing the trick of the flickering candle to my weariness. Further into the room, a display of carved wooden effigies, arranged in a tableau of ritualistic scenes, caught my attention. I recalled that these figures had been set in fixed positions by the local craftsmen, intended to dramatize the recent trials. But now, as I advanced with my lantern, the figures seemed to have rearranged themselves. 2 of the figures, once depicted in a benign posture, now appeared to be locked in a macabre embrace. Their garments, hallowed as they were, clung awkwardly to contorted forms. The third, whose head had always been carefully chiseled to reflect a calm demeanor, now sported a visage twisted in a grotesque grimace, the head unnaturally turned, as though rotated by some unseen hand. I stood frozen, heart pounding in a rhythm that matched the erratic beating of my pulse. Shaken, I retreated into the narrow corridor leading to the evidence room. A passage lined with small leaded windows through which the austere faces of our forefathers and judges peered out in silent condemnation. The light of my lantern revealed a most unsettling sight. Behind one of the windows, the figure of Judge Jonathan, depicted as stooped and resigned, appeared to sway gently as if in a final, futile surrender to fate. Yet, even more disturbingly, the usual somber expressions of those captured in painted likenesses had begun to warp into masks of terror and despair. Their eyes, once dull and lifeless, now shone with an intensity that belied the natural order. I recalled, with mounting dread, that the great oak door behind us had been designed to seal the chamber once all had departed, a measure intended to prevent interlopers during our nightly ritual of record-keeping. Now, as I stood amidst these eerie rearrangements, I could almost hear a whisper of disquiet, as though the very air trembled with foreboding. A sudden, jarring clamor of wind rattled the small panes, and I felt, with chilling certainty, that the boundary between the mortal realm and some darker, unseen domain had begun to dissolve. Desperate to restore order and quell the rising terror, I grabbed the stout lantern and forced its beam upon the distorted figures. Under the stark illumination, the effigies' features seemed to pale even further, their painted expressions contorting into something that might well have been the face of the devil himself. I steeled myself, whispering fervent prayers under my breath as I moved through the corridor, every step measured and slow, my mind warring with reason and the dread of the inexplicable. It was then that I heard a sound, a low, rhythmic tapping, like the measured beat of a drum, emanating from beneath the cold flagstones. I followed the sound to a narrow passage where, in the gloom, a pair of well-worn black Puritan boots appeared to tap in cadence, though no living soul stood nearby. My heart raced, and I dared not linger, quickening my pace in hopes of escaping the oppressive atmosphere. At length, I reached a small chamber at the rear of the meeting house. Here, a somber tableau was displayed. Two figures, rendered in crude wood and dressed as gravediggers, were busy shoveling earth into a shallow, stone-lined vault. Their movements were unnaturally jerky, almost as if they were replaying a grotesque, eternal dance of death. As I rounded the corner, I gasped in horror. The figures' heads were missing, their detached features strewn about the ground like scattered tokens of some unholy game. In that moment, the veil between the living and the dead seemed perilously thin. Beyond this ghastly scene hung one final portrait, a grand, somber painting that had long been a reminder of Salem's tragic descent into madness. The image once portrayed our town's dignified citizens, paying homage to the victims of witchcraft hysteria. Yet now, in the flickering half-light, it depicted a scene of unspeakable carnage. Townsfolk lay decapitated or horribly mangled upon the ground, and a forlorn preacher dangled from a withered tree, his eyes void of hope. Atop the hill in the painting, Eve, whose countenance had already unsettled me, smiled in a manner that was neither kind nor human, but disturbingly inhuman. I could scarce bear the sight, and with trembling resolve, I made my way back through the meeting house. The night outside was alive with the relentless rain, its cadence echoing like the lamentations of lost souls over the cobbled streets. I wrapped my threadbare cloak tighter about me as I exited, only to be overcome by a final, ghastly vision. In the flicker of a distant oil lamp at the door, I saw that same portrait of Eve, now mounted above the entrance, seemed to animate for but a moment, her eyes lifting from their painted prison to meet mine, and her hand, pale as death, lifting in a slow, deliberate gesture of farewell. The next morn, the town stirred to its customary routine. seemingly oblivious to the eerie happenings of the night before. I heard little more than hushed murmurs in the market square, and even the magistrate offered no explanation for the inexplicable disturbances. Life in Salem trudged on, marked by an unspoken acknowledgement that sometimes the line between mortal judgment and the supernatural is perilously thin. Yet, even as I resumed my official duties, recording testimonies that would forever haunt our collective memory, I could not escape the lingering dread. In the quiet moments of a public hearing, when my eyes inadvertently met those of Eve's portrait once more, I swore for a fleeting instant that her eyes shone with an accusatory light, as if reminding me of a terrible, unalterable truth. For one fateful, heart-stopping moment, I felt that the cold breath of those long-departed souls had brushed against my very being, a silent herald of the dark forces that continued to lurk in the shadows of Salem. I know not if what I witnessed that night shall ever be understood by reason, or if it is merely the cruel confluence of divine retribution and human folly. But one certainty remains. The haunted past of Salem is never truly past. In the relentless chill of the New England night, as shadows stir and the wind carries whispers of forgotten sin, one cannot help but feel the inexorable pull of an ancient, unspeakable terror, a reminder that the legacy of the witch trials endures, as vivid and haunting as the very day it was writ into our history. I, Felix, have always harbored a secret fascination with the paranormal. Ever since childhood, when I'd watch The X-Files with rapt attention, the mysterious has drawn me in, both thrilling and terrifying me in equal measure. Now, however, I stand on the brink of a situation that transcends harmless excitement. I fear that both my life and that of my girlfriend may be in very real peril. For years, I quietly observed online forums and hushed conversations about supernatural events, watching as strangers in desperate circumstances helped one another. So when unsettling events began to spiral out of control, I reached out for every bit of support I could find. Almost a year ago, I met Catherine, so I call my girlfriend, to preserve her anonymity, at a quaint colonial tavern in Salem. I had noticed her long before she stepped into my life. Her shoulder-length, silky chestnut hair, her form-fitting vintage sweater reminiscent of early New England styles, and her well-worn denim jeans that spoke of a modern yet timeless charm. There was an unmistakable warmth in her smile, a magnetic quality that drew me in relentlessly, even if it sometimes seemed to puzzle her companions. That very evening, while Catherine sat at a table with friends, clumsily playing a friendly game of pool in the tavern, she giggled at every misdirected shot. Holding the cue awkwardly, she sent the balls careening off course. I had momentarily turned to discuss the latest Patriots game with some acquaintances when a sudden shout rang out, "Watch it!" In an instant, I spun around and saw a pool ball slam into my beer glass. Foam and shards of glass exploded over me. Still dazed, holding a stray shard in my hand, I caught sight of Catherine rushing over. She apologized repeatedly, helped me wipe the damp stains from my shirt, and carefully checked my hand for lingering cuts. In that moment, nothing else mattered, neither my soaked clothes nor the risk of injury. I was completely enraptured. We locked eyes, shared a hearty laugh over the mishap, and she insisted on replacing my drink, determined to make up for the broken glass scattered across the tavern's old wooden floor. For the rest of the evening, we sat side by side, two souls seemingly destined to be together. In the months that followed, we discovered every facet of one another. From Catherine's quirky love for classic supernatural TV shows like Bewitched, to charming tales of her childhood when her mother had sung at local town fairs. Yet, time and again, our conversations returned to the inexplicable. a shared passion for the paranormal that deepened with every encounter. Our journey into the eerie began with researching local legends and New England folklore. We attended organized ghost hunts, though most stops were modest. An unexplained knock here, a fleeting whisper on the wind there. Nothing that truly made our hearts race. However, one location held a particularly sinister allure. An abandoned colonial chapel on the outskirts of Salem, rumored by locals to be cursed. Legend had it that if you circled its weathered graveyard 3 times counterclockwise, the ghost of a woman condemned during the witch trials would appear. I saw nothing, yet Catherine was adamant that she glimpsed a spectral figure near an ancient gravestone cloaked by the chapel's shadow. Then, just a few weeks ago, an unexpected email arrived from Catherine, who works at Marblehead's town hall. It contained a link to a last-minute ghost hunt scheduled for that very night in the infamous Witch Woods, a dense forest known for its ghost stories and grim colonial history. Apparently, a group had just enough space to include one more participant. Without hesitation, I replied, "Our midnight adventure is on." I would later nearly regret that impulsive decision, for I could never have imagined that this excursion would offer far more than the usual thrill of chasing a legend. Personally, I had never been one for outdoor investigations. Too many variables like chilly winds and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. But the spark of anticipation in Catherine's eyes left no room for argument. We donned our weatherproof jackets and set off toward Witch Woods, a sprawling, mist-enshrouded forest on the outskirts of Salem, steeped in centuries-old lore about witches, devils, and restless spirits. Though I was familiar with the narrow, foggy streets of historic Salem, this wooded expanse was entirely new to me. We lost our way several times, retracing our steps until we finally spotted signs of civilization and rejoined the small group that would share our eerie expedition. The evening began in a familiar, almost ceremonial fashion. A brief welcome speech, an almost soporific safety briefing, and a rundown of our equipment. I couldn't take my eyes off the high-tech night vision goggles provided. Our organizer then recounted the lore of Hangman's Hill, a nearby site notorious among locals. According to legend, if you parked your car at the base of the hill and left it in neutral, it would mysteriously roll upward, as if an unseen hand were dragging it along, echoing the grim fate of those once condemned in Salem's infamous witch trials. We sat in our car and, to our astonishment, watched as it slowly inched upward, a sight that still sends shivers down my spine. After witnessing that bizarre phenomenon, we returned to our original meeting spot to commence our vigil. It was late April, the mild temperatures belying the foreboding mood that would soon descend. Our vigil was eerily quiet. We called out into the dark, summoning any spirits that might be watching, listening intently for a sound that would send us running. The minutes dragged on until a planned break arrived. We gathered around portable heaters, sipped lukewarm tea, and scattered to a few rickety wooden outhouses, an unexpectedly mundane moment amid the supernatural. As I rejoined the group after our break, I noticed Catherine striding purposefully toward me, her eyes sparkling with mischief, as if daring me. "Let's do something wild." She pulled me aside and whispered, "Let's explore the woods." Before I could object, she had already slipped into the dense, fog-laden forest. A knot of apprehension formed in my stomach, but I followed her quickly, careful not to alert the rest of the group. When I finally caught up, I asked, "Where exactly are you headed?" With a playful smile, she replied, "Somewhere unknown. We'll follow our instincts and then call out. Maybe the spirits will respond better if there aren't so many of us." I had little choice but to follow. We ventured deeper into the dark, damp fog until, after about 10 minutes, the familiar landmarks vanished. The trees grew so densely that the mist became nearly impenetrable. "Don't worry," Catherine said confidently, "I know the way." Yet, the deeper we went, the more unsettling it became. Branches brushed against my face, and I felt my clothes tugged by rough twigs. Just as I was about to suggest we stop for a moment, a deliberate cracking sound echoed around us. We froze, taking in deep, cautious breaths as we strained to listen. "Did you hear that?" Catherine whispered. I listened carefully. The wind had died down, so much so that one could hear the softest sound, and yet there it was, the unmistakable crack of a thick branch breaking as though purposefully struck against a tree. "Crack! There it is again," she hissed. "Maybe we should turn back," I began, when suddenly the sound of firm footsteps emerged from the moist darkness. Despite the dense fog, the steps were measured, someone moving with determined purpose and drawing ever nearer. I stood frozen as Catherine gripped my arm so tightly I could feel my pulse slow. And then, emerging from the mist, she appeared. From the shifting fog materialized a figure that seemed to drift from another realm. A spectral woman moving with an otherworldly grace, as if floating. She wore a long, flowing white dress that clung to her form. Although there was no breeze, the fabric rippled in the pale moonlight. A profound, unsettling stillness emanated from her, accompanied by a magnetic pull that ensnared my very senses. Her face was flawless, almost as if carved from porcelain, and her eyes, once a radiant blue, shone with an unearthly light. Her long, blonde hair floated about her, as if animated by an unseen current, and yet her body seemed slightly translucent. In that moment I realized, standing before us was the ghost of a woman from Salem's haunted past, a spirit of one condemned in the notorious witch trials. Though my mind screamed caution, I could not tear my gaze away from her eerie beauty. When she silently beckoned us to follow, Catherine and I moved almost mechanically. It wasn't until I felt the continued grip of her hand on my arm that I fully comprehended our dreadful situation. We were following a dead woman's apparition, just as the old legends had foretold. I tapped her arm once, twice, but she remained in her trance. Panic surged within me and I jerked her roughly, trying to snap her from the spell. In that moment, I noticed something dreadfully amiss. Slowly, I let go and staggered back, taking a deep breath to steady myself. Her face, so familiar and dear, had transformed. Those once bright blue eyes were now as dark as midnight, devoid of pupils, and her delicate features seemed to pulse as if marked by sinister veins. Her neck appeared to beat in an unnatural rhythm, and I stood paralyzed by terror. At that very moment, a mournful, otherworldly wail rose from behind her. The apparition advanced, no longer the serene figure that had first captivated me, but now one marked by twisted shadows and an aura of deep malevolence. As I stared into her abyss-like eyes, a sensation of overwhelming weakness swept over me, like being trapped in a crushing grip from long ago, when a much larger bully had nearly left me unconscious. But this was no physical assault. It was a supernatural enchantment threatening to consume my very being. The longer I stared into those dark voids, the more I felt myself slipping into a paralyzing stupor. In a moment of sudden clarity, I noticed Catherine's hand had been taken by the specter, and she was slowly being led toward a small clearing. Then, my survival instinct flared. It was time to fight or flee. A jolt of adrenaline shot through my body, and I began to breathe rapidly. As the spectral hold weakened, I realized I had only a brief window to act. Summoning every ounce of strength, I lunged forward, desperate to pull Catherine free from the ghost's grasp. I ran toward her with all the determination I possessed, only to be blocked by the apparition. For a heart-stopping moment, our eyes locked in a silent confrontation. I met that foreboding, dark stare that seemed to warn me not to come any closer to Catherine. In that split second, I saw Catherine slowly coming to herself. Her hands reached up to her face, and she scanned her surroundings as though trying to understand what had just happened. That was my chance. I knew I could never truly battle the spectral force, but if I was swift enough, I might just slip past its influence. Gathering every bit of courage, I surged forward. In the instant our bodies collided with the chilling presence, I felt as though I had plunged into an icy mountain lake, my body overtaken by an almost unbearable cold that nearly robbed me of consciousness. Yet I reached out with both arms, determined to grab Catherine, and together we broke free. I clutched her tightly, and we both tumbled to the cold, hard forest floor as the ghost let out a piercing, soul-wrenching scream. We rolled several feet across the rough ground before we finally managed to rise. Even then, the ghastly figure lingered nearby, its eerie glow casting long shadows. I needed to confirm that Catherine was truly free of the ghost's hold. With trembling fingers, I brushed the damp hair from her face and, gazing into her eyes, recognized her once more. My dear Catherine, alive and full of warmth. Before I could recover my thoughts, she cried out in panic, "What are you doing? Run, now!" Without hesitation, I sprang to my feet, grabbed her hand, and together we sprinted with all the strength we had, our hearts pounding as our legs burned with exertion. Only when we finally paused to catch our breath did I notice that my face was bleeding, scratches from branches and thorny underbrush marking my skin. Catherine sank down on the forest floor, tears mingling with sweat as we clung to each other amid the silence, trying to figure out how we'd ever find our way back. Had that spectral presence been following us all along? Breaking the charged silence, Catherine suddenly declared, "Damn it, I've got that Find the Car app on my phone." She produced her device and held it high against the starry sky, searching for a weak cellular signal. "There, left," she commanded. And with resolute determination, she led the way. In an almost otherworldly quiet, we followed the feeble glow of a deserted road until we finally saw the smooth asphalt and the distant beams of an empty rural street. A deep sense of relief washed over me as we stepped onto the road and spotted our car far off in the distance, as if the supernatural terror had suddenly released its grip. We hurried inside, exhaled deeply, and started the engine. "What on earth?" stammered Catherine. "It's nearly 4 a.m. We split from the group at midnight. How did so many things happen in just a few hours?" I could only shrug. It hardly mattered in that moment. What was important was that we had managed to make it home, both of us alive. Once safely back at my apartment, I collapsed into bed, utterly drained. Catherine stayed awake a bit longer, insisting on a quick shower to rid herself of the lingering chill from the ordeal, no doubt still rattled by what had happened. I tried to offer soothing words, but before I could say another syllable, sleep claimed me. The next morning, the sun burst through my window, its bright rays dispelling the remnants of the night's terror. I stretched, yawned, and leaned over to tenderly kiss Catherine's forehead, only to find her skin was icy cold. Confused, I sat up and pulled back the covers to see her lying in cozy pajamas adorned with playful motifs reminiscent of Salem's witchy lore. She trembled softly, and when I tried to rouse her, she remained as if caught in an enchanted sleep. Panic surged through me. I had to call for help immediately. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The calm operator listened to my anxious, halting words, and naturally, I left out any mention of the supernatural, and advised me to keep her warm until help could arrive. I dashed into the hallway, retrieved a thick, worn cardigan from the closet and wrapped it around her as gently as I could while lifting her carefully back into bed. There, I massaged her arms to stimulate circulation, drew her close, and shared every bit of my warmth with her. Slowly, she stirred, letting out a soft groan, and as I looked into her eyes, I recognized the miracle. Her hair glistened in the morning light. Her skin was flawless as porcelain, as if the night's terrors had passed without lasting harm. Her once dull blue eyes brightened as they met mine, and in that quiet moment I realized with all my heart that I loved her more than ever. My name is Jacob Holman, and I am a babysitter, but not for ordinary children. I care for the offspring of the supernatural, those whose origins reach back into the dark legends of Salem's past. For the past 7 years, I've worked in this peculiar trade, and my clientele has included nearly every imaginable creature. Werewolves, angels, banshees, dwarfs, elves, fairies, golems, and beings that no history book ever mentions. Each kind is unique and carries its own dangers. Don't misunderstand me. I love my work, but many an evening at the old Lindenwood estate has shown me that even experience does not protect one from the unknown. It all began 7 years ago, when I was still an unassuming youth in a small New England town, working as a babysitter to earn a bit of extra money. I mostly looked after the children of influential local families, and only rarely was I recommended to outsiders. Money was always scarce. I often earned barely a pittance, but it was enough to get by. The turning point came on a gloomy autumn evening when I was offered a job to look after a pair of twins in a venerable old colonial mansion, a residence steeped in grim legends and the lingering dread of witch trials. The fee was far above my usual rate. I assumed the generous sum was due to the arduous nature of a night's watch in such an isolated and eerie setting. In my past experience, babysitting meant that the children usually slept, and my only duty would be to prepare supper and breakfast. I set out early to ensure I arrived on time at Lindenwood Estate, a stately mansion perched atop a hill in Salem, its weathered stone and clinging ivy echoing the tragedies of colonial witch hunts. The drive took me along a narrow, winding road through a dense New England forest, where ancient oaks and maples, dressed in the fiery hues of fall, cast an almost ghostly twilight. The rustle of fallen leaves and the distant moan of the wind sounded like the whispers of souls long past. After a long, serpentine journey, I finally turned onto a gravel driveway leading to the estate. A building marked by centuries-old stonework and heavy dark shutters that imbued it with an air of secluded mystery. The meticulously kept garden, a relic of a bygone era, boasted trimmed lawns, a wooden swing set, and even a small weathered pond rumored by the town's elders to be cursed. The 3-story mansion, once the stage for countless witch trials, presented itself with numerous towers and chimneys reaching into the overcast sky. The firmly shut shutters gave the estate an undeniable sense of isolation and dark secrecy. My pocket watch read 7:15 p.m. I was 15 minutes early. With one last checking glance in the side mirror that confirmed my youthful yet earnest appearance, I stepped from the car. The silence surrounding the mansion was almost otherworldly. Every step I took on the gravel seemed to echo into the vast void of night. As I approached the massive double doors and raised my hand to knock, they creaked open with a spine-chilling groan, and my heart skipped a beat. Standing before me was a woman with a gentle yet resolute expression, a look that blended familiarity with an unspoken mystery. "Ah, you must be Jacob, and you've arrived earlier than expected," she said in an accent that recalled the old Puritan cadence of these parts. "Please, come in. My daughters are eagerly awaiting you." I followed her into the expansive entry hall, where I removed my shoes in a small foyer. Despite the closed shutters, the interior of the mansion was bathed in light. A curious mix of antique chandeliers and modern-style lamps that created a striking interplay between tradition and newness. Mrs. Gertrude Lichtenberg, as she introduced herself, guided me along a broad corridor into a generously appointed kitchen reminiscent of lavish colonial feasts. There, two 10-year-old twin girls sat, dressed simply yet charmingly in coordinated outfits. "Hi, I'm Abigail," the girl on the right announced in an enthusiastic tone, while her twin Lydia added with a warm smile, "And I'm Lydia. It's so wonderful to finally meet you." After I introduced myself and assured them that I was pleased to take on this unusual assignment, Mrs. Lichtenberg asked me to wait in the foyer while she explained the house rules. "Oh, the girls already seem fond of you," she began, a slight smile playing on her lips as if sharing a secret. I almost forgot to properly introduce myself. "I am Mrs. Gertrude Lichtenberg. I'm exceedingly grateful that you will care for my daughters. Ever since I became the last descendant of a cursed lineage, tied inextricably to the very witch trials that scarred Salem, I have been forced to keep my distance from public gatherings. I appreciate your trust, Mrs. Lichtenberg. Your children appear both sweet and well-disciplined. May I ask what sort of meeting demands your sudden departure?" I inquired cautiously, knowing that more was at stake than a simple babysitting job. A mysterious smile touched her face as she replied, "The Witch Assembly, Jacob. I am the heir to the ancient legacy of our foremother, a witch whose power has been safeguarded for generations. Since my daughters were born, I have been unable to attend any of the gatherings." I blinked, scarcely believing what I was hearing. "So, you truly are a witch?" "Yes, my boy," she replied softly, almost wistfully. "For over a century, I have preserved the wisdom of our ancestors. I chose you because I heard you had once cared for children of demonic nature. Compared to those dark creatures, my daughters are gentle and meek." I had secretly expected a laugh or a conspiratorial giggle from the girls. Instead, I saw in her eyes a mix of worry and solemnity, making it clear that this was no jest. "So, you are not part of a modern coven, but rather the last remnant of a cursed bloodline?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Exactly, Jacob. I am a witch haunted by the memories of countless victims of the witch trials. It would be reckless to leave these extraordinary children with an inexperienced mortal. I had hoped you possessed a sensitivity to the occult. I warn you, tonight will be far from ordinary, and your courage will be severely tested." My heart pounded. The temptation to decline the job and pocket the money tugged at me, yet the gravity in Mrs. Lichtenberg's tone and the palpable dread of the mansion held me in place. In that moment, I recalled all the whispered legends of witches hunted in these very woods, and the cursed souls still said to wander the shadows. "I'll do my best if you grant me this chance," I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Good, Jacob," she replied, her eyes conveying both relief and stern warning. "Consider this a trial run. Had my assembly not been of utmost urgency tonight, I would never have chosen you. But now, as I must depart, listen well. The rules of this house are not mere decoration. Follow them without deviation. My phone number is enclosed in a small letter. Call me immediately if anything goes wrong. Should you break even one rule, inform me at once." "Understood," I answered, feeling the adrenaline surge through my veins as her firm words left no room for error. After Mrs. Lichtenberg urged me once more to read the enclosed letter carefully and ensure all doors were securely locked, she departed the mansion to attend her secret meeting of the Witch Assembly. No sooner had she left and the massive entry doors shut behind her than I gathered my nerve and retreated to the kitchen to study the letter. Dear Jacob, thank you for agreeing to look after my daughters this evening. I am convinced that these little ones, small angels blessed by ancient powers, will reveal something truly special in your eyes. Below, you will find the rules that you must follow concerning the children and the estate. If you adhere to these instructions, the night should pass without incident. The girls will retire shortly after my departure and will not awake until about 7 a.m. I will return at 9 p.m. Your primary responsibility is to maintain order in the house. Notify me immediately if anything goes awry or if any rule is breached. Some rules are strictly time-bound. Set alarms or keep a vigilant eye on your watch. The girls are remarkably independent. They have already dined and will be in bed by 8 p.m. Should they wish to play afterward, traditional parlor games are permitted. Escort them to their rooms on the second floor and lock the doors for the night. Do not worry. Each room has its own privy and all necessary comforts. Open the doors only after 7 a.m. You may hear knocking or voices at the exterior doors or behind the shuttered windows. Regardless of who it may be, do not open them until after 9 p.m. All interior doors in the mansion are locked by default. If you wish to enter any room, knock 3 times and listen carefully. Should you hear strange or eerie sounds, wait a few minutes before attempting to enter again. Once you have entered a room, turn about and swiftly close the door. No matter what you see, do not interrupt the closing process. There are exactly 3 mirrors in the house, 1 in my bedroom and 1 in each of my daughter's rooms. In all other areas, no mirrors are to be found. Should a mirror ever appear to stare back at you, stand erect, rotate until you see the back of your reflection, and slowly back out of the room while keeping the mirror in sight. If your reflection appears once more, repeat the procedure. No extra knocking is required, but ensure the door is firmly closed. If you hear footsteps on the staircase or sense something approaching, move to the nearest corner and press your back against the wall. Do not search for the source, and under no circumstances turn around. Remain motionless until you hear the footsteps ascending to the 4th floor. There is no 4th floor. The appearance of one is an illusion wrought by a curse. Should you find stairs leading upward from the 3rd floor, turn back, do not run. I advise you to avoid the purported 3rd floor if possible. You may sleep there if you wish, but never switch on the lights. Use only the red flashlight provided in the kitchen. Use any bedroom available to you, except mine and those of my daughters. Just ensure that all subsequent points are fulfilled before bedtime. Check that the larder is secure, the hearth is out, and every appliance is in order. Turn on all the parlor's small televisions at exactly 8:30 p.m., preferably at the same time. The channel is unimportant. There are 4 sets. 1 in the living room, 1 in the study, and 1 in each of the 1st floor bedrooms. On the kitchen counter lies a brown package. Use the red flashlight at 9 p.m. to carry it to one of the bedrooms on the purported 3rd floor, observing rules 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Double-check that all window shutters are securely fastened. Go to bed, but ensure that at exactly 9:15 p.m. a glass of water is set on the counter. Afterward, do not return to the kitchen until 9:30 p.m. No matter what sounds you may hear, follow these instructions and all will proceed smoothly. Please, take good care of my daughters. Sincerely, Mrs. Gertrude Lichtenberg. Barely had I finished reading the letter when doubts overwhelmed me. What were these bizarre instructions meant to signify? Why must a glass of water appear exactly at 9:15 p.m.? And what of the knocking, the staircase sounds, or even the mirrors? A part of me yearned to decline the assignment and claim the money, but the weight of Mrs. Lichtenberg's sincerity and the foreboding atmosphere of the mansion kept me rooted in place. The girls behaved exactly as the letter described. We played a round of 9 men's Morris, an old parlor game favored in these parts. Yet, when bedtime arrived, we had to cease play immediately. It was an experience that left an impression, for these children seemed to have been schooled in the art of strict adherence. Once the girls were escorted to their rooms, I found myself alone in the mansion. The hallway was bathed in an eerie glow that stood in stark contrast to the enveloping night. Outside, a faint twilight seeped through overcast skies, but indoors, the bright lamps and chandeliers reigned supreme. I checked my pocket watch. 8:25 p.m. Thanks to its multiple alarms, I had alerts set for 8:30, 9:00, 9:15, 9:30, and again at 9 p.m. In the imposing, almost sacred kitchen, adorned with dark granite and antique embellishments, I sought the red flashlight and discovered it beside the brown package on the counter. I hesitated at the thought of pre-filling the glass of water, fearing punishment for any deviation. Instead, I set out to locate the 4 televisions as instructed. The long corridor, lit by old sconces casting flickering shadows on ancient stone, guided me first to the living room, where I immediately found a television. I then ventured to search the remaining rooms on the first floor. Approaching the first door, I knocked 3 times as prescribed and entered. The room was sparse, featuring an aged set mounted on the wall. After a thorough inspection that revealed no modern contrivances, I switched on the television and returned to the corridor. At the next door, however, when I knocked gently, a sight unfolded that could only be described as nightmarish. A dim dungeon filled with blood-stained torture devices stretched before me. In a darkened corner sat a gaunt man, calmly laboring at an old workbench surrounded by archaic tools and rusted chains. Overhead, a television hung as incongruously as a relic from another era. My hands trembled as I quietly closed the door and sank to the floor in shock. What had Mrs. Lichtenberg intended with such a room? Was I in immediate peril? Thoughts raced through my mind. I longed to run, to hide, yet the rules must be followed to avoid dire consequences. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to knock once more, 3 times exactly as mandated. This time, behind the door lay only silence. Hesitantly, I turned the knob and peered inside. To my astonishment, the ghastly sight had vanished, replaced by what now appeared to be an ordinary bedroom, as if the horror had dissolved into nothingness. Although my mind rebelled, the need to adhere to Mrs. Lichtenberg's directives drove me onward. I entered the room, spun around, and swiftly closed the door, just as ordered. For a moment, I stood in stunned silence until I realized that, despite the absurdities and fears surrounding me, I had no choice but to complete this assignment with unwavering diligence. When Mrs. Lichtenberg had assured me that this was no ordinary babysitting night, I might have dismissed it as a prank. But now, in the heart of a mansion haunted by the ghosts of Salem's dark witch trials, I was bound to obey the ancient rules. My watch now read 8:35 p.m. Only 10 minutes remained before it was time to carry the brown package to the upper floor. I turned on a television, drew a deep breath, and left the room. The corridors now appeared more menacing than ever. The harsh light seemed cold and unyielding. I found the study, knocked as instructed, listened intently, and detected a faint, almost plaintive sound from behind the door. Though my heart pounded in my chest, I followed the rule and waited 3 minutes before trying again. When silence finally returned, I switched on the television in that room and returned to the kitchen to collect the package and the red flashlight. On the stone landing of the staircase leading upward, a sudden realization struck me. Something was amiss. The rules decreed that the supposed third floor must remain shrouded in darkness, but before me lay a corridor, brightly lit as if it belonged to the first floor. An ominous sensation seized me. I was now on what must be the so-called fourth floor, an area that, according to legend, should not exist. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, lined with doors and antique lamps shimmering in the gloom. Confused and gripped by panic, I hesitated. Should I risk descending, or was my fate sealed by traversing this accursed zone? Just as I summoned the courage to call Mrs. Lichtenberg, I suddenly heard footsteps behind me on the stairs. Step, drip, step, drip, step, step. The footsteps approached inexorably, and I knew I must not meet the gaze of whatever unearthly presence advanced. In a frantic surge, I ducked into the first room on the right, clutched the brown package tightly to my chest, and listened as the footsteps echoed past. Step, drip, step, drip, step, step. With trembling breath, I waited until the sound passed my door. Then, cautiously, I peered through the gap. A room bathed in a deep, unsettling red glow that both shielded and terrified me. Despite my fear and the potential rule-breaking, I knew I had to call Mrs. Lichtenberg. With shaking fingers, I dialed her number. Hello? Hello, Jacob. What's the matter? Her voice was calm, yet carried the urgency of secrets centuries old. Mrs. Lichtenberg, I have a problem. I'm on the fourth floor, and I heard strange dripping sounds pass by my door, I stammered. So, you're on the fourth floor, holding the brown package, and you've heard these odd drips? She queried sharply. Yes, that's correct, I whispered. Listen well, Jacob. 3 questions will determine the gravity of this situation. First, what room are you in? Second, did you knock 3 times before entering as required? And third, did you take cover in a corner when you heard the footsteps? Her voice trembled with tension. I felt my throat tighten. I'm in a bedroom, the first room on the right, but I must confess, in my panic, I did not knock 3 times, nor did I retreat to a corner. I am so sorry, Mrs. Lichtenberg, the fear overcame me. Fortunate for you, Jacob, she sighed in relief. You see, on the 4th floor, the rules differ. Had you knocked properly or taken cover, the situation might have been far worse. Far worse indeed. That is, at least somewhat reassuring, I murmured, struggling to conceal my relief. What should I do now? You still have the package. Open the door in one swift motion, quickly, and hurl the package as far from the staircase as possible. Then count the steps carefully and rush straight down, but be cautious not to descend too far into the cellar. That would be fatal, she ordered with steely resolve. Understood, but what if I cannot find a replacement package on the 3rd floor? I asked hesitantly. No, Jacob. For tonight that will suffice. Tomorrow evening I will send you 2 more packages. Just remain silent and follow my instructions, she concluded. With trembling hands and a heavy heart, I emerged from my hiding spot, pressed my hand to the cold doorknob, and flung the package down the dark corridor as instructed. In that fleeting moment I caught sight of a shadow that seemed to follow me, and then I sprinted down the stone staircase, counting each step until I finally reached the ground floor. My watch read 8:58 p.m., leaving just 2 minutes to precisely prepare the glass of water. I raced back into the ancient kitchen, filled a glass with clear water, and set it exactly on the counter. Exhausted, I sank onto the cushioned sofa in the living room, my body and mind marred by the night's events. Only a few hours had passed, yet I had glimpsed into the mansion's dark secrets. A dungeon, the 4th floor, a near encounter with a dripping shadow, and numerous breaches of the rules that nearly drove me to despair. Morning broke swiftly, and fortunately, I had taken refuge in one of the upper bedrooms. That night I heard no further footsteps, no knocking at shuttered windows, and no more uncanny reflections in any mirror. As the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, and at 7 a.m. the girls were released from their locked rooms, Abigail, Lydia, and I gathered in the kitchen for a modest breakfast of colonial pancakes and eggs, a cherished New England tradition. But barely had we begun stirring the batter when a dull knock sounded at the front door. A voice, both familiar and eerie, echoed through the stone walls. "Hello, who's there?" "It's me, Mrs. Lichtenberg. I've returned, and it seems I've forgotten my house key." The girls held their breath. I recalled the rule. Do not open the door before 9 p.m. regardless of who it might be. I tried to remain calm, though an unsettling feeling told me something was amiss. "Come on, open the door," the voice urged, now clearly agitated. We stood in tense silence until, finally, I heard footsteps receding from the entrance. Gradually, the girls relaxed, and the preparation of our breakfast resumed its comforting rhythm. Yet inside, the question lingered. What had that been? A cunning ruse, a malevolent spirit, or perhaps the vengeance of long-dead victims of Salem's witch trials? Thus concludes, more or less, the account of my first night as a babysitter for the supernatural in the shadow of Salem's ancient witch trials and cursed legacy. Later that evening, Mrs. Lichtenberg returned and explained that my brave, though imperfect, handling of the night had convinced her to recommend me to other families in the future. There is a place on the edge of Salem's rugged harbor where the dark Atlantic murmurs old, sorrowful tunes to those who dare listen. In the old New England villages, it's said that on bitter November nights one might hear the plaintive cry of a young woman, the lament of a heart forever shattered by loss and cursed by a witch's unholy bargain. I never believed in such legends until my own life was marked by a tragedy that seemed torn from the very pages of our haunted past. I was raised in a small Salem hamlet, a place where death and despair were no strangers. In the harsh winters when icy gales swept in from the Atlantic, many souls were claimed by the relentless cold, and the sea itself was rumored to swallow the unwary whole. These tales were nothing more than eerie stories, until I experienced the unthinkable. In the year of our Lord, 1692, my beloved Abner, a gentle soul who worked both as a fisherman and a surveyor of the restless harbor, vanished into the maelstrom. One crisp November morning, as the pale sun timidly rose over the surrounding hills, dark and foreboding winds began to howl. The sky turned an ominous gray, and in the span of moments a savage storm descended upon us. Our small fishing vessel was no match for nature's fury. It shattered beneath the tempest's wrath, leaving behind only tattered sails and a torn rescue boat. In that brutal instant, Abner and his comrades were claimed by the merciless sea. Stricken with grief and haunted by memories too painful to bear, I left Salem behind, wandering far afield to bury my sorrow. Only when a dear friend urged me to return to care for my ailing mother and younger siblings did I summon the courage to come home. The years away had tempered my spirit, yet the guilt and heartache over Abner's loss lingered like an unshakable shadow. I arrived back in Salem determined to face my dark past, even as I had no inkling of the further torment that awaited me. Days in our modest village were spent in ceaseless toil, earning our daily bread, mending our humble home, and tending to the family. Yet, every evening, an inexplicable pull led me to the salt-soaked shore, where I would stand for hours and listen to the endless murmur of the Atlantic, lost in memories of a love gone awry. Between the silent vigil of the night and the ceaseless whisper of the waves, something began to stir. A presence born not of flesh but of profound, unyielding sorrow. It was the mournful wail of a forlorn spirit, the cry of a widow eternally searching for her lost lover, her lament carried away by the cold tides. This spectral mourning would prove to be the harbinger of a dread that I would soon come to know. It happened on the eve of the anniversary of that fatal storm. After tucking the children into bed, I set out with my mother along a lonely path by the harbor, seeking comfort in a shared jug of home-brewed ale and memories of days long past. We recalled the brave men lost to fate, bittersweet laughter mingling with our grief. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of deep crimson, my mother urged us to return and prepare for the night. Left alone, I found myself fixated on the darkening waters, watching as the relentless sea seemed intent on erasing every trace of memory. Then, as if in answer to my silent yearning, a chill wind swept over the shoreline. I adjusted the worn woolen coat tighter around me, lifting my eyes to the undulating waters, and that's when I saw it. A thick, ominous fog began to creep over the harbor, as though it were alive. Drawn by a mix of fascination and unnameable dread, I followed its spectral dance as it edged closer to both the shore and to me. Slowly, from the mist, a familiar shape emerged. A small fishing boat, its ghostly form gliding silently over the waves, evoking the memory of that fateful day. A lump seized my throat as I watched the phantom vessel drift with an otherworldly grace. Before I could fully comprehend what was unfolding, my body moved on its own accord. I found myself stepping into the icy water. The shock of the nearly freezing sea was brief, its pain lost amid a torrent of tears that blurred my vision. Before I knew it, I was waist deep in the frigid water, trudging toward the apparition of the boat that dredged up all my haunting recollections of the deadly storm. Then, abruptly, I halted. My mind raced to question how I could be drawn to a vessel that should have long since succumbed to the depths. I paused, scanning the dark horizon, when suddenly I caught sight of a figure in the water, a dark, looming silhouette of a woman. She fixed her hollow gaze upon me, not a mere reflection but a spectral presence in her own right. Her skin bore an eerie, oily sheen. Her eyes were empty as if the light of life had been siphoned away, and her long, intricately braided hair floated around her like the tattered wings of a fallen angel. Her mouth was agape, locked in a silent, eternal scream. Instinctively, I recoiled, my eyes darting between the cursed boat and the ghastly apparition. Yet, as I moved, her unyielding stare seemed to follow me, and for a fleeting moment the vision of the boat flickered like a shadow in a nightmare. A strangled cry escaped me as I spun around, desperate to flee the watery clutches. But before I could break free, cold, clammy hands gripped my waist, pulling me back into the abyss. An otherworldly force, beyond mortal comprehension, dragged me deeper into the icy depths. It felt as though some dark power had seized me, pinning me against the relentless chill of the water, while a sinister breath brushed my neck. The ghostly figure, once faint and forlorn, now revealed a dreadful strength. Her spindly arms reached for me again, compelling me further into the dark. As my head sank beneath the turbulent surface, I fought with every ounce of will left in me. I thrashed, crying out for mercy as the biting water filled my lungs. Summoning a final surge of strength, I turned my face toward my tormentor. Under the veil of the dark water, her appearance transformed in a horrifying display. Her once slick, dismal skin smoothed into an almost youthful form, and where emptiness had dwelled, deep, sorrowful brown eyes now glowed with unholy intensity. Her hair, now fashioned into intricate braids reminiscent of the wings of a fallen seraph, framed a face that, though clothed in a pristine white gown, as if lifted from sacred texts, was marred by an expression twisted in hate. With spectral hands outstretched, she reached once more to drag me into oblivion. Dizziness and a desperate need for air overwhelmed me. In a final act of defiance, as her cold grip closed in, I clawed at her eyes with all the strength I could muster, a futile attempt to shatter the frozen mirror of her soul. A sickening crack echoed beneath the water, and in that instant she froze in a silent, agonized scream. With every remaining breath, I tore myself away, battling upward toward the surface until I burst free, gasping and soaked in terror. Barely able to stand, I discarded my sodden coat to escape the burdensome weight and crawled, shivering, along the shoreline, hacking out the ice-laden water from my throat. When I finally dared to look back, the ominous fog had lifted, and the spectral boat had vanished without a trace. Yet, along the edge of the water, a dark, oily shadow lingered. A figure with hollow eyes that seemed to penetrate my very soul. Overwhelmed by fear, I barricaded myself inside my humble home that very night, bolting every door and shuttering every window, as if to keep the evil at bay. The next day, after a long, heart-wrenching conversation with my mother as we tried to exorcise the demons of our shared past, we resolved with heavy hearts to leave Salem behind and seek solace further inland. The unearthly events of that accursed November night had revealed to me that there exist forces beyond mortal understanding, and I could no longer endure the relentless torment of the haunted legacy borne by the witch trials and their lingering curses. Thus ends the account of that dark night in Salem, when the boundaries between this world and the spectral realm blurred, and the terror of witchcraft seeped into every shadow. May this tale serve as a somber warning to all who hear it, a reminder that some legends are forged upon a grim and enduring truth, and that the curses of the past never truly fade away. I grew up in Salem, Massachusetts, a town forever marked by its horrifying witch trials. Whispers persist that most who were hanged during those dark days were innocent victims swept up in collective hysteria. Yet, amid the mass injustice, one figure remained apart. Her name does not appear in any official record. No proper death certificate was ever issued, nor was she given a proper burial. She was, by all accounts, the one true witch of Salem, the one who set the terrible events into motion. My family's history reaches back to that troubled era. As a passionate student of history, I was electrified when my father told me of the diaries kept by our ancestors. Among them, the founders of Salem, who had somehow survived the madness of the witch trials. I had to read them. At first, the records were mundane, accounts of meager harvests and minor quarrels, even disputes over land with a certain Mr. Proctor. But when I asked my father if there were more writings, he urged me to search the attic. So I began to rummage through dusty boxes and forgotten relics. Amidst swirling dust and what might have been some old crumbling materials, I discovered nothing at first. My disappointment grew until I noticed that one pane of old wooden paneling was not original. Removing it, I uncovered a wooden chest bound by a sturdy chain, its appearance older than time itself. The chain was far stronger than I had expected, yet the lock looked long past its prime. It didn't take long before I managed to pick it and retrieve its contents, a remarkably preserved, blackened diary. I kept this secret from my father and opened the diary only when I was sure the house was silent. The entries were penned by my great-grandfather, one of the many venerable ancestors of our family. He began by detailing his everyday life in our colonial town, until he mentioned a woman named Eveline. I had heard tales of a tempestuous love, yet my great-grandfather devoted entire pages to extolling her incomparable beauty. On February 3rd, 1692, he confessed his love for her. She rejected him. What followed in the next 4 pages were some of the most horrid and malevolent words I have ever read. His passion turned into a seething grudge that made my head spin. 2 days later, he recorded a chilling plan. After slaughtering his livestock and inflicting a grievous wound upon himself, he would approach the authorities and claim that Eveline had dispatched her demonic spirit to commit unspeakable acts. He expected that she would then be accused of witchcraft, forced to confess to save her life, and imprisoned for a time. But events spiraled even further into darkness. The town's officials soon stormed her residence. Finding the house completely empty, they searched every nook until a concealed trapdoor was discovered. Descending into the inky depths of a cellar, they encountered a sight my great-grandfather detailed with unflinching precision. A natural cavern bathed in a ghastly green glow. In its center lay a pool of water blacker than pitch, encircled by the macabre remains of adults, animals, and children who had vanished without a trace years before. Hand-drawn lines of blood, glowing like fiery scars, connected severed limbs and heaps of organs. Just as the assembled men recoiled in terror and began to flee, a lone lock of hair drifted in the murky water. Seized by uncontrollable fury, my great-grandfather plunged into the pool and seized Eveline by her hair. For this was no ordinary woman. She was a genuine witch, deep in the midst of a ritual whose true purpose remains a matter of speculation. His rash interference shattered her spell abruptly. The authorities could not take her into custody, for as they drew her from the pool, her skin began to bubble and appear to dissolve. With a blood-curdling scream and words in an alien, nearly indecipherable tongue, she disintegrated before their eyes. As her eyes dimmed, she released a curse, a final, damning pronouncement meant to plague the inhabitants of Salem and any who might hear her tale. With that last promise of death and ruin, Eveline breathed her last. Yet the curse did not perish with her passing. The very next day, a man was found savagely mutilated. Nearly all his organs were missing, and his eyes were so grotesquely sunken that they seemed poised to burst forth from his skull. The following day, his wife was discovered in a similarly grisly state. Yet another day, 2 of her closest friends were found dismembered. One managed to survive, the other did not. In terror, the townspeople scrambled to find a way to halt the relentless carnage, but each day that passed claimed more victims. One day, my grandfather conceived a dreadful idea. He asked his neighbors if they wished to hear the story of Eveline's death. They agreed, and as he had predicted, the very next day they were all slain. The following day, when he again inquired if anyone wanted to hear the tale, the people declined and returned to their routines. Those who refused were spared. My grandfather then informed the town's magistrates that anyone who consented to listen to the tale of the witch's demise was marked for certain death. He warned that if those who heard it were to pass it on, they too would face the same fate. That very day, all who had learned of the story were hunted down and hanged, accused, under the guise of witchcraft. Soon, a paralyzing paranoia spread throughout Salem. No one knew who had heard the story and who had not, and the body count rose far beyond what my grandfather had ever intended. Just as I was about to read how the curse might finally be broken, I discovered that the final pages of the diary had been torn away, some stained with blood. I had always been told that my grandfather was killed by a wild beast. Now I see that this was far from the truth. I set the diary aside as an icy chill swept through my room. In that moment, I realized I had just absorbed the tale of the witch's death, and that this very ancient curse-bearer had begun his entry that day by asking whether the reader wished to hear the story. Thus it is revealed. There are 3 conditions to fall victim to this curse. One must know the witch's name, know how she died, and be willing to listen to her story. I do not know if recounting this tale will break the curse and spare me. After all, in the real world, no one wishes to hear this story, except you. You already know her name, you know how she died, and you have listened to her story. Whether it works, I cannot say, but my final hour draws near and I am desperate. Good luck, for Eveline is coming. My grandparents arrived in Salem from England in the early 1690s, lured by the promise of a new life in a land both hopeful and haunted. They settled in a modest wooden home on the outskirts of Salem village, and among their many children, my father was the youngest. My grandfather had long passed away, so my grandmother, Ursula, came to live with my father's household. In a devout Puritan community steeped in suspicion and fear, Ursula's ways were whispered about as merely eccentric at first. Yet I would come to learn that behind her odd habits lay secrets that defied the God-fearing norms of our town. As a child, I never quite understood what set Ursula apart. She shunned the refined language of our sermons, instead speaking in a rough, archaic dialect that carried hints of otherworldly lore. Every morning, without fail, she rose at the crack of dawn, when the pale light first crept over the distant Atlantic, and withdrew into a small, shadowed chamber. That room reeked of wild herbs and strange incense, filled with long, flowing skirts, adorned with mysterious patterns and a collection of antique amulets and talismans that seemed older than the colony itself. I would later suspect these objects were not merely heirlooms, but relics of forbidden knowledge. When my little brother Caleb fell ill with a fever and a relentless cough, our parents trusted solely in Ursula's remedies rather than the town's apothecary. I still remember peeking through the narrow gap in the heavy oaken door and witnessing a scene that would haunt my dreams. In the dim, flickering candlelight, I saw Ursula's bent back as she held a live chicken high above Caleb's shivering body. The poor bird squawked furiously, its wings beating in panic as if pleading for mercy. In a swift, almost ritualistic motion, Ursula snapped the hen's neck. With the same cold precision, she decapitated it, letting its dark, spattered blood fall upon my brother. The sight filled me with unspeakable terror, and I bolted away to my small cot, huddled beneath a rough-spun blanket. Yet by dawn, Caleb's fever had mysteriously abated, and he played as though the ordeal were nothing but a grim dream. My closest friend, James, would later murmur in hushed tones while we walked along the narrow, cobbled lanes of Salem. "I don't trust your grandmother. There's something in her eyes that makes me shudder." He confided that in his sleep, spectral images of Ursula haunted his dreams. I dismissed his fears, insisting she was merely a peculiar old woman. Still, as the years passed, James's terror only deepened, while I remained uncomprehending of the dark force that seemed to linger behind Ursula's every gesture. Ominous signs began to pile up. Our faithful hound, Remus, vanished one cold autumn evening. In his place, we discovered his torn collar entangled with a strange bundle of wild herbs left on our sagging doorstep, a token that unsettled the superstitious townsfolk, who whispered that Ursula's powers could both heal and harm by arcane means. The true turning point came when I was but a young teenager. James's elder brother, John, had recently acquired his first carriage, a creaking, rickety contraption that promised newfound freedom, but soon became an instrument of misfortune. One bitter evening, after a gathering at the local tavern where John had indulged in too much cider, I requested in a trembling voice, "John, pray, can you give me a ride home?" John laughed in a slurred tone and clumsily fumbled for the carriage keys. James, clutching a half-empty flask, protested in hushed urgency, "He's far too inebriated. Let us walk instead." But I, anxious to beat the curfew mandated by our strict parents, insisted. Reluctantly, James accompanied me, fearing for my safety in John's careless hands. The carriage lurched into the inky dark of a Salem night. Without caution, John reversed the vehicle against a weathered wooden post before careening onto the narrow, lamplit lane. Amid the chaos of splintering wood and the clatter of hooves, the carriage collided with a heavy supply wagon, sending us into a disorienting spin of timbers and shattered glass from nearby storefronts. I screamed, convinced that death was upon us. In the ensuing confusion, as I struggled amid the wreckage, I felt a sudden, cold, bony hand press against my neck and a foul taste on my tongue. A sensation so repulsive that I lost consciousness entirely. When I next awoke, I found myself in my own humble chamber. My left arm was bound in a crude splint fashioned from wood and cloth, and I struggled to rise with the aid of makeshift supports. It was nothing short of a miracle that I had survived. Word soon spread. John had perished at the moment of impact, and James had vanished without trace. The local constable's inquiry uncovered a most unsettling detail. A witness, a wary merchant, had reported seeing a mysterious woman wearing a ghastly mask riding in the back of our carriage just before the crash. By the time the townspeople arrived, all that remained was a pool of dark, congealed blood on the wreckage, with no sign that I had staggered from the scene. It was only later, when I dared to look at my reflection in a tarnished pewter mirror, that I noticed the most disturbing change. My eyes, once a common, earnest brown, had turned an unnerving, piercing blue, as if touched by some supernatural force. I have never been able to say for sure what transpired that dreadful night. Perhaps it was the meddling of my enigmatic grandmother Ursula, rumored to have once been accused of witchcraft during the Salem witch trials. Or perhaps it was the malignant spirit of this haunted land. Every time I glimpse my own reflection, I swear I hear a faint, mocking laughter, a whisper from the shadows of Salem, forever reminding me of the dark legacy and the whispered legends of witches that have plagued our community for centuries. They say that in our little town of Salem, Massachusetts, an ancient horror still lingers. When autumn arrives and a cool gray mist begins to weave its way along the narrow colonial streets, the elders gather by their fireplaces to murmur of a witch who once walked among us. According to local legend, she was steeped in dark arts, able to speak with the dead and curse any who betrayed her. In the late 17th century, as the Salem witch trials raged with fervor, she was accused by the magistrates, tortured, and condemned to death. Yet some believe that her spirit endured, bound forever to a crumbling stone well hidden deep within a place known as Devil's Grove, a forbidden spot where even a cautious foot dare not tread. It is whispered that Devil's Grove was once a sacred ground, revered by the native tribes long before the arrival of European settlers. When the old world was being reshaped by new beliefs, ancient powers clashed with emerging faith, and it is said that these primordial forces still stir among the gnarled oaks and time-worn paths. In the twilight of a late October, when the leaves turned fiery red and the nights grew long, Salem's historic streets took on an eerie, otherworldly air. Weathered wooden homes leaned together along uneven sidewalks, their porches adorned with carved pumpkins and scarecrows, a blend of colonial superstition and age-old rituals. It was during this season that my neighbor, Mrs. Stone, recounted the chilling tale of the Well Witch. Her hushed tones and trembling eyes painted a picture of dread, and that very night I began to dream of a narrow, dusty path leading to a rusted sign, behind which nothing but consuming darkness lay. One crisp afternoon, propelled by a mixture of apprehension and morbid curiosity, I climbed into my old, sputtering 90s sedan and set out in search of that fabled path. I drove along the familiar state road until I turned toward the outskirts where Devil's Grove was said to be. I had heard that a tiny hamlet once stood there, a place where local beekeepers sold homemade honey and apple brandy. But on that day, everything felt different. Mere minutes later, a battered private property, enter at your own risk sign emerged from a stand of dense pines and moss-covered stones. A chill raced down my spine as though I had stepped into a pocket of time long abandoned. I parked the car with the engine still idling and stepped into an atmosphere heavy with moisture and the faint, earthy scent of decaying leaves and wild mushrooms. The silence was nearly complete, save for the distant call of a raven. Approaching the time-worn sign, I could barely make out the faded inscription, its letters nearly devoured by rust. Beyond the sign, an overgrown path wound its way into the dark forest, flanked by mossy boulders, thorny underbrush, and ancient oaks whose branches seemed to whisper warnings with each gust of wind. After several tense moments, I stumbled upon a tiny, weather-beaten cemetery enclosed by a low, crumbling stone wall. The headstones were etched with names and symbols so worn that only fragments remained, victims of relentless rain and wind. And there, almost hidden among the gravestones, I found the infamous well. It was constructed of roughly hewn stone, partially shrouded in moss, with a fragile wooden roof whose beams threatened to collapse at any moment. A small iron crank dangled askew, as if untouched for decades. Drawn by an irresistible force, I stepped closer, and almost as if guided by an unseen hand, reached out to grip the cold stone edge. My heart pounded in my chest as the wind began to howl through the brittle branches, carrying with it what sounded like a chorus of hushed voices. Without fully understanding why, I found myself reciting an old incantation, every word falling from my lips as if compelled by fate. Beware, beware the well, which, once among us, now she haunts. She summoned the spirits of the dead, and none escaped her cursed hand. She deemed us traitors, hearts grown cold, and in the depths her revenge unfolds. Beware, beware the witch in stone, for her forbidden lore will change you, never again the same. My voice trembled as I spoke each line. Then, almost mechanically, I removed the wedding ring from my finger, a symbol of a once happy union now fractured beyond repair, and, with a mix of defiance and sorrow, dropped it into the dark well. To my astonishment, there was no dull splash or echo of water. Instead, a strange, hollow whistle reverberated upward, accompanied by an icy shudder that seemed to seize my very soul, as though a spectral hand were gently clutching my heart. In that moment, a dizzying thought struck me. What am I doing here? Have I come with pure intent, or am I driven solely by a selfish need? It was as if the well itself sought to strip me of my very essence, testing my worthiness. Then, amid the eerie silence, I heard it, a soft, mocking giggle. At first, it sounded like the cackle of an old woman, echoing up from the well. Suddenly, that giggle escalated into a shrill, thunderous laughter that overwhelmed my senses. Overcome with terror, I stumbled backward, tripping over a protruding tree root and landing hard on the damp earth. Clutching a nearby blackberry vine in a desperate bid to steady myself, I bolted blindly toward a break in the trees where I knew my car was parked. Branches whipped across my face, and thorns tore at my clothes as I ran. My lungs burned with each frantic breath. Finally, I reached my beat-up sedan, yanked open the door, and jumped in. I floored the accelerator and reversed down the narrow road, the tires squealing as I jerked the wheel wildly, nearly losing control before finally returning to the familiar stretch of suburban street. Only after several heart-pounding minutes did I realize that my hands were still trembling uncontrollably, and my pulse raced as though in a sprint. back in the modest solitude of my small apartment, the events of the day began to catch up with me. Had it all been real? Or had my mind, overwhelmed by modern life's relentless pace, blurred the line between reality and a waking nightmare? Yet nothing in my life had ever felt as tangible and bone-chilling as that encounter. The memory of that cursed well was as concrete as the worn pavement outside my window. Sleep did not come easily. Night after night, my dreams became battlegrounds of terror. I saw my mother's hollow, sorrowful eyes. I witnessed flames engulfing the old family home. I smelled the acrid stench of burning hair, and always that disembodied, mocking laughter. I jolted awake time and again, heart pounding, with the feeling that I was being drawn ever closer to some unspeakable doom. In the days that followed, my paranoia only deepened. Out of the corner of my eye, I would glimpse figures lurking in the shadows, or catch the sound of giggling that sent chills down my spine. One day, while driving to work, I was suddenly sure that I had collided with another car. I could almost feel the impact and hear a crisp, eerie crack. But when I stopped and stepped out, there was no one there. Only the angry glare of a woman in a car behind me remained, her face etched with the shock of a near miss. My pulse thundered in my ears as I imagined seeing blood on my own bumper, though in truth, nothing was there but a growing, unyielding dread. Time and again, I attempted to retrace that old path, hoping perhaps to undo the curse or reclaim the ring I had lost in the well's depths. Yet, every time I drove along what I remembered, the route dissolved into a modern suburb lined with freshly paved roads and new houses. No forest, no weathered private property sign, no abandoned cemetery. It was as if that entire realm had been a fleeting threshold, open only for a moment before vanishing as mysteriously as it had appeared. Desperation led me to dig into Salem's old records and chronicles. I came across accounts from the 17th century detailing the tragic tale of a young woman named Catherine Hastings. Accused of witchcraft, she had been executed at a stone well on the outskirts of the town. Court records spoke of bizarre occurrences during her arrest: candles that flickered out inexplicably, a black cat repeatedly seen perched upon the church wall, and one of the clergymen even noted that, before her death, Catherine had uttered a curse destined to befall anyone who sought her dark counsel out of curiosity or greed. Then, just a few nights ago, I felt her presence once more. I stood before that same well. This time, however, the darkness within was not absolute. A faint, ghostly glow shimmered beneath the surface, as though a spectral light were dancing just out of reach. The water rippled, and slowly, a shadowy silhouette emerged. A gaunt, cloaked figure with a pallid face, eyes as cold and luminous as glacier ice, and silver-white hair floating about her like mist. In a strangely warm yet unsettling voice, she beckoned, "Come to me in the depths." And then the light died away, leaving only the echo of her resounding, ominous laughter. I awoke, drenched in sweat, my hands clenched tightly in the sheets. It was still dark outside, with only the weak glow of a street lamp filtering into my room. My mind raced with 100 questions. What am I to do? Who would believe such a tale? A priest, a psychiatrist, perhaps even a shaman performing a cleansing ritual. I could feel the curse tightening its grip with every attempt I made to ignore it. And in the silence of those long, sleepless hours, that mocking laughter echoed in my head, as if she were taunting me. I became convinced that the witch sought to claim me, either to drag me to my death, or to make me complicit in her endless revenge. Since that fateful day, I have tried to confide in friends and acquaintances, but they dismiss my account as nothing more than a nightmare. Some advise rest cures, stress relief, or even medication for my troubled sleep. None understand that I stand on the threshold of something far greater, a dark legacy that has seeped into Salem's very foundations. If I ever find that well again, I will try to break the curse. Perhaps I must offer a sacrifice, confess my sins, or prove my remorse deep within its cold, shadowy depths. But is that not madness? Is it not exactly what the witch desires, my complete submission to her dark call? Every night as I close my eyes, I see her once more, her gaunt face, her piercing, ice-blue eyes, and I hear her inviting whisper, "Come, join me in the depths." Until that day comes, I remain haunted by her call, wondering how long I can resist before I am forever lost in her eternal darkness. Thus, the legend of the Well Witch endures in Salem, a ghostly echo of our past, a spectral warning to those who dare to peer too deeply into the mysteries of old. Whether it is but a grim fable or a truth buried beneath centuries of fear, none can say for sure. But if you ever find yourself drawn to that forgotten place, ask yourself one thing before you dare to look into the well. Are you willing to pay the price, even if your soul is not as pure as you believe?